So welcome everyone. My name is
No, no, yes, no.
okay. So kindly keep yourself on mute. Uh, uh, so thanks everyone for joining this meetup presented to you by Agile Brigade. And Agile Brigade is a meetup group. We are based in Canada. There is a small municipality here in the region of Durham. Pickering is where our base is. It's part of the Greater Toronto Area, and we are a community that is little over 1 year in the making. So we've come a long way. All throughout, we've been doing virtual meetups since COVID has hit the region. So it's our, I think, maybe ninth or 10th uh, webinar virtually. And myself is Nawaz Bhatt. I'm one of the organizer of the meetup group. And I would like to shout out to our partners, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation and Elevate Change. They've been a big support throughout the journey. So a big thank you. So today we have Colleen Johnson joining us for the webinar, and I think she had a very interesting topic to discuss. The title for this topic is Scale Retrospective, and a little about Colleen is that she's the CEO and co-founder of ScatterSpoke, uh, and also she's the CEO of ProKanban.org. I think she probably would talk maybe more about it when she introduces herself formally. But yeah, Colleen's been working with the Agile community for a while, and then she has served as a board member for Agile Denver and Agile Uprising, and she is a chair of Mile High Agile Conference. Fun fact about Colleen is that she is the happiest in the woods, and with that, I would pass the floor to Colleen. Colleen, floor is all yours.
I think she's muted.
Where is? I don't think so. She's muted. I think she's muted probably on her side.
Yeah, from her side.
Colleen, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Did it go mute? Did it mute everyone? There we go.
I muted. Sorry, I muted everyone because there was background noise. So while I was giving my monologue, I had to mute everyone. Unfortunately.
I had some really great jokes that everyone missed. So now, just kidding. I didn't really. Okay, let's get. That's not giving you full screen share though, right? All right. All right. Nawaz, can you confirm that that's giving us screen
Uh,
share?
It is not in the present in the slideshow mode. It is. I think you probably need to run your slideshow first, and then there should be another window in Teams.
All right. Do we have slides and audio?
Yep, we are all set.
Yep, looks
Excellent.
good.
Okay. So as Nawaz was saying, my name is Colleen Johnson. I am the founder of ScatterSpoke, which is a space for more effective team retrospectives. I'm also the CEO of prokanban.org, which is a brand new community for learning about Kanban. I've been pretty involved in the Agile community here in Denver and then nationally with the Agile Uprising. And like Noah said, I've got 3 kids. So my favorite thing to do with them is to go be in the woods and camp and get away from screens, since this is our world. That's my favorite break. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. So you guys got a brief view to the outside right now. It was 65 degrees Fahrenheit here yesterday, and it is supposed to start snowing during this call. So I'll have to give you guys a glimpse to outside. We'll see what happens in the next hour in terms of Colorado weather. So I'm super excited to talk to you about retrospectives. This particular quote is something that really has stuck with me over the last year. And it started with something that I usually refer to as a retrospective recap or a retro recap, where I'll pull all the Scrum Masters together and we'll talk about, what is coming out of the retros, what themes are we hearing, what big problems are we hearing, or maybe where are the teams overlapping in terms of some of the issues they're having. And for one of the clients that I work with, we invited the CTO to join the conversation. And as we were talking about it, she said, I had no idea how many teams were struggling with the exact same problem. Think about that for a second. We have a tendency to sit in our retros and we talk through all of these problems that the teams are having. But a lot of times we never know if other teams are struggling with the same thing, or maybe have even solved for the same problem. So let's start at the very beginning here with what makes a great retrospective, right? Retrospectives are a regular opportunity for us to gather feedback about a product, a process, how we're working. And our goal with our retrospectives here is to make sure that we're doing these on a regular basis so that we can improve. So we're constantly checking in and saying, how are we doing and what could we be doing to get better? From a team perspective, we're looking at, things like our process. We might be talking about communication within our team, communication outside of our team. Our goal here is that we're making a safe space for everyone to have a chance to be heard. This can take time, as I'm sure many of you know, to build up that trust and that safety, so that these retrospectives can really be a place where the team can take ownership over what they're doing. I tend to probably give more latitude to the teams than maybe some of my clients would like. I like to have the team look at their retros as an opportunity to really run experiments and identify small improvements to how they're working and try new things out, right? It might not be that what works for one team works for another team. So they're constantly refining their process with these small changes and small improvements or experiments that they're running to see what they could do to improve how they're working. And when we think about our organization, there are multiple different places where we have an opportunity to gather feedback. So at the bottom level here, the team, I think, is probably what many of us think of when we think of a retrospective. We're having team level retrospectives, typically on a regular cadence at the end of every sprint or maybe once a month. But that tends to be the most common and most frequent place where we're having retrospectives. And then at the program or portfolio level, this might be a release train if you're doing a scaled agile framework where you're doing an inspect and adapt workshop as part of your program increments. I tend to call this area here between the team and the overall organization the system. So it can be that you have a team of teams or a portfolio that contains multiple release trains or multiple programs. But these are where we start to see multiple groups working together for a common deliverable. And then, of course, at the organization, I can't see anybody's hands and I can't see the comments for this setup. But I always like to ask the question, has anyone actually had an organization-wide retrospective where they work? And I've given this talk a few times now, and the answer is usually no, or very few people have had that opportunity, which is so interesting, right? When you think about how much energy may go into things like HR reviews or surveys, or trying to understand the pulse of the company and its employees. When we think about what we're doing with retrospectives, there's really so much overlap and so much opportunity to learn and apply the patterns to identify improvement across an entire organization. So let's talk about each of these levels in a little more detail. So when we think about the team, we're looking at our small teams and what information can we gather about how this team works that's going to help drive improvement about our performance. So I have to share, when we think about our retrospectives, we can really break a lot of the feedback up into qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback. And I think it's very important to gather both types of feedback in your team retrospectives. Qualitative feedback, I think, tends to dominate a lot of our retros. And we'll talk here in a moment about how you can start to pull more data in to the conversation. But this particular image kind of stood out to me because I have a great friend that recently became a Scrum Master, and she reached out to me after getting her first job and then had her first retrospective and said and sent me a text, and it said, is it normal for developers to cry in their retrospectives? And I kind of laughed, and I reached back out to her and said, I've had that happen too. And I've had people yell at each other or storm out or, cry or throw a Sharpie. I think that retrospectives can actually get very emotional. And I think when you think about the why behind that, it's because we're talking about our work. We're talking about our workload, maybe the balance of work, the pace that we're working at. We're talking about failures, and we have to be raw and sometimes expose some things that are difficult to talk through. So sometimes these retros can get very emotional. They also require a lot of trust and safety. So being able to be really honest with your team and talk through some of these things that might be difficult or emotional, like I said, takes a lot of time and takes, I think, building up that trust with your teammates. The other thing we look at for a team level retrospective is typically quantitative feedback. So our goal with having our retro is that we're checking in on typically the same few metrics at every retrospective. Sometimes this is like, what did we commit to versus what did we deliver? Sometimes this is overall velocity trends. If you're using flow-based metrics, you might be looking at things like cycle time and throughput. But really, you want to identify a few key metrics that you can review at every retrospective. And then also looking at the trends. So, it can be interesting if you're looking at cycle time from one retro to the next. Maybe from this retro to the last retro, your cycle time got slower by 2 days. And maybe that's not a huge concern, but if we were to look at trends over the last 6 months, it's been slowly getting longer for the last 6 months. And over 6 months, your cycle time has gone up maybe 10 days. So it's a great tool to have those simple metrics and then also looking at trends from your retros over time. I like to kick my retros off with this review, and I think it helps kind of frame the conversation and shape the conversation to be really targeted around improvements that are anchored in that data. so that we're making sure that we're all talking about the same thing and we have something we can reference when we say things like, it feels like we slowed down, or it feels like we're getting stuck and not getting as much work done. You've got the data there alongside you to have a conversation about, well, by how much are we slowing down, or how much work is getting blocked? So this combination here at the team level, right, tends to be a combination of feelings and data. So, you know, talking through your process and the impact that maybe blockers or having work get stuck has had on your ability to produce value for your end users. Looking at things like, are we going faster, slower, are things getting better or worse, and trying to connect that to the data and look for what data supports that. And then, are we improving, right? So we typically write action items and have small improvements from our last retro. I think it's really important to try to anchor those improvements in data as well. So if you're going to make a small change to how your team is working, how will you know that it's helping you improve? And can you create a metric that you'll review at your next retrospective to inspect whether or not you're getting the results that you desired? So all of this is great, but I think that there's actually a downside to team level retrospectives. I think we're so focused on making our team the best and making our team work well together and deliver value quickly that it can often be at the expense of other parts of the organization. So when we're really working on locally optimizing our team, it might be maxing out a different part of the system or pulling at another part of the organization where we're starting to take maybe time or energy away from an auxiliary team that now cannot support another team effectively. The other downside of this local optimization or localized conversation is we often have the same conversation over and over again. So we can get kind of stuck on really focusing on just the things that are pain points for our team without focusing on a lens or bringing a lens of the impact kind of system-wide to some of those bigger problems. We also tend to have a lens when we're in our retros of only fixing things that are in our control to fix. There's actually even a retro format that I've used too, where you talk through all of the problems that the team is having and then separate them out by what's in our control versus not in our control to address. And that's really interesting. What happens to all those things that go into the bucket that are not in our control, right? I can tell you what I did with them. I recycled them. So when you think about that, think about how much lost opportunity there was to address issues that were probably impacting a lot more of the business. When we think about this level of feedback now, that's team to team, this can be, like I said, an agile release train, a program, portfolio level. This is all system feedback. And this is going to be information about a collection of teams where we're trying to improve coordination of dependencies and collaborative delivery. And our goal here, when we start to think about a system level retrospective, is how can we connect the dots? Looking for trends and themes. I mentioned that concept of a retro recap at the end of each sprint. What's important as we start to do that is that we can share some critical things that the team may feel is outside of their control without breaking their trust. And this is tricky, right? You want to be able to escalate up these things that you want to address that are outside the team's control, but doing it without saying maybe verbatim what was said in the retro or disclosing who provided a specific piece of feedback. The goal here is to really look for themes and patterns, and then think through who is the right audience to participate in this conversation, who can help, who can really help address the issues. So a lot of times that audience might be slightly different than who is reviewing the information. So sometimes I like to pull managers or directors or leadership level into a retro recap, where we're at a high level saying, without disclosing maybe what team's having a particular issue, saying, you know, it seems like all of the teams are really getting stuck right now with our deployment pipeline, and it's slowing down our ability to deliver because we're getting stuck testing in our staging environment. And being able to back that up with some data about the impact that's having to each team then gives you an opportunity to really look at some wider scale improvements. The other thing that often happens when we think about system level retrospectives is we have them pretty infrequently. So we tend to go off and do all of our work independently in our teams, and maybe once a quarter we come back together and we talk about, you know, what is going on for the teams. A lot of times we collect new data when we do this. So we'll pull all the teams together, maybe at a PI planning event or a quarterly roadmap event, and we'll say, how did the last quarter go? If I asked you guys that question, how did the last quarter go? What would you say, right? I don't remember what I did last week half the time. I would have a hard time telling you how a quarter went. So it's really important when we start to think about these retros where we're pulling data from multiple different teams together, we want to make sure we've created a path to gather data all the time. And that means that all of these sprint level retrospectives, we need to have a way to identify the things that need reviewed at that system level. And that's not just metrics, right? The metrics are important and the metrics are super valuable, but the qualitative feedback is also super important. And then make sure that as you're reviewing all of this team information, that you're making it easy to see and easy to collect so that you can have a conversation about what's been happening over that longer period of time. So our goal here for these system level organizations is that we want to have priority and transparency. So looking at from the team level, what are the things that we could be working together to improve? And how do we expect to see that improve things for the business? I think if somebody sounds like they're making a delicious dinner, if you could mute your microphone, that would be great. So when we think about these system level retrospectives, we're looking at priority and transparency, and how can we all contribute towards moving the needle together, and then tracking our outcomes in the same way we would at the team level, right? So looking at how will we know that it's making a difference for the teams, and how are we all working together in alignment towards these improvements. And then the next level of feedback is really, as we said, organization-wide. So when you think about all of these different systems that are working to help your organization achieve their goals and outcomes, how are we sharing information with all parts of the business? You know, from a technology perspective, have you ever had a retrospective that included people from marketing and sales and customer support? Could you identify opportunities to get all of those groups together and have a conversation about what's working for them and how you might be able to help them in their roles? What's important here as we start to think about these larger scale retrospectives is that we create a lot of visibility. And that means understanding like how frequently are we going to do these retrospectives across the organization? How will you provide feedback? And then what do we do with what comes out of these? As I'm sure many of you have experienced, I think that the death of a good retrospective process is inaction. And you can come up with the best improvements all day, but if they don't go anywhere, people lose faith in the process pretty quickly and they don't want to participate anymore. So when you think about these organization level retrospectives, you want to start thinking about what comes out of them and how do we create visibility into the action items and how we're doing on completing them, and showing that we're making big improvements and big changes. One of the most important parts when we think about organization-wide retrospectives is thinking about the organization as a whole, right? So rather than looking at this by department maybe or by product lines, looking at how are we all delivering together and how does something that engineering is doing impact marketing, for example. So our goal there is to look at successes as an entire organization and not just one team, and failures as an entire organization. I've been part of a few companies now that have really made celebrating failures part of their vocabulary and part of their culture. And I think that's a pretty amazing experience for leadership to celebrate things that didn't go so well, so that everybody can take a step back and see that as an opportunity to learn and improve how they work. So when we think about these larger scale retrospectives, whether it's a system level or an organization level, what we're really looking at is how do we make the shift from thinking about things that impact us locally to how they impact the system globally. So connecting the dots from a data perspective, maybe getting people from different parts of the business together, looking at how can the things that we're trying to improve have an impact on other teams. And if you got involvement from all different parts of the business, how would things be different, right? If you got that alignment and working together so that you were all marching towards the same improvement, what would that look like? I'm sure a lot of you have heard of systems thinking, and that's really what we're getting at here, right? Is a holistic approach that focuses on the way that all of these parts work together and contribute to the context of the larger systems. So as we think about systems thinking from a retrospective standpoint, and how do we connect the dots across all of these different smaller retros, what's going to help us start to implement and see value from scaling our retrospectives? I think you need two things, and we're going to talk about these two things in terms of frequency and volume. And I'll walk through what I mean by both of these things here. But when we think about frequency, we're talking about how often are we getting together to connect the dots. If you're only doing a system level retrospective every quarter, you're having 4 of these a year. Is that frequent enough to actually see improvements and to actually have those improvements impact how the business runs? And when you think about volume, what we mean is, are the needs of the teams and the issues the teams are running into getting carried up the organization in a way where the people who can help make those improvements are hearing about them? So think about that quote at the beginning, right? You know, I think a lot of times leadership can be kind of surprised to hear what comes out of these retros, because they're like, that's an easy thing to fix. Actually, I can address that immediately. But if we don't have a way of getting that feedback to other parts of the business, they'll never have that opportunity. So we'll talk about this in terms of an organization that looks something like this. We have teams and teams of teams that make up programs and portfolios that contain those programs, and the organization has multiple portfolios inside of it. So when we think about the levels of feedback, right? If there is something that one team is struggling with that's impacting the entire portfolio, the volume of that feedback needs to be loud enough that it's going to get all the way up this chain to the people that are helping coordinate that portfolio so we can do something about it. The other thing is, if it's impacting one team in that portfolio, chances are it's impacting all the other teams in that portfolio. So how do we reach out and connect the dots and find those common themes and patterns so we can create a clear story and a clear picture of what is happening? So when we think about feedback, and we think about the frequency of feedback, what we mean by that is the rate at which the feedback is provided. So think about this almost like electrical currents, right? If this is that org chart here that you saw at the back, this bottom row is our teams, right? And teams are doing retros every 2 weeks. Think about all that data you're collecting. You've got a lot of information about what the teams are struggling with, what's going well, failures, successes, things they've tried.
Colleen?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Are we supposed to be seeing a slide here?
You sure are. Is there no slide showing?
I see it.
You see a
Yeah.
slide.
There is.
Yeah, I see a
Me too.
slide.
Here,
Yeah,
so
I see it.
Mark, it may just be you, buddy.
I see
Okay,
a
man,
slide.
that's cool. It usually is just me. Okay.
I was going to say we've missed a lot if there's no slide showing. There is a recording, Mark. So if we can't figure out how to get the slides to show up, hopefully the recording will capture them and you can come back and look at some of these diagrams after. I'm happy to just send you a PDF too if you want to reach out. So if we're looking at this diagram again with this level of the organization, and the bottom level is having these retrospectives every 2 weeks and we're getting feedback constantly, but then we go up one level and we're doing those, let's say we're doing a program retro every 12 weeks or once a quarter. And then maybe, you know, we're doing a portfolio retro every 2 PIs, or every, you know, we're looking at that level twice a year. And then maybe we're doing those org level retros once a year. It's an annual event. Think of how much opportunities you're missing out on to make an improvement to how this organization works. And think of how much information you're getting, you're gathering from those teams that you're not getting to act on. So our goal here when we think about frequency is, how do we create a constant vibration all the way up the organization that's going to give us the opportunity to do something with it. When we think about this level of feedback frequency, think of this as just data collection, right? The more data we have, the more we know about what's happening in the organization. So the more you can collect data and share data about retrospectives in a way that's safe, that's critical. But it creates an opportunity so that our data is really reflective of how the teams are working all the time. So it's not just that snapshot in time, right? I mentioned that with being a downside of doing quarterly retrospectives and gathering new data for that quarterly retro. I'm kind of ignoring a lot of what the teams already said their problems were for the last 12 weeks. So you want to make sure that you're gathering as much data as possible here, so that when we start talking about what things we need to address, it's less reactionary and it's more a snapshot of what's been happening over time. Figure out a way to identify patterns, whether it's labeling themes or creating categories or connecting retro feedback back up to things like OKRs. Figure out how to identify those patterns and create some visibility, especially across your peers and from, you know, Scrum Masters and other Agile coaches, where you can start to look at data across the other teams. Maybe scrub it so that you can't tell the team name, and look at things like, it seems like other teams are struggling with our deployment process and the time it takes to get through testing. And maybe that all connects back up to a tag or a theme of cycle time. So being able to look through a bunch of data that the organization has collected where other teams have tagged things as a cycle time issue would give you the opportunity to see that a lot of teams are struggling with this, so that you can work together to come up with an improvement. The other factor that's critical here is feedback volume. So if our frequency is the rate at which feedback is provided, feedback volume is the rate at which feedback is transferred. So we can be having retros all the time, but if we're not raising the volume of that retro feedback kind of up the chain here, it's going to stop. So you can see here on this second, the second group of teams where there isn't any volume coming out there, that team may be losing an opportunity to have an impact on improvements that would affect the other teams in their program, or even the organization as a whole, if that feedback's not going anywhere. So how do we fix this? I think the first thing is to try to create a very easy path to elevate feedback. And make feedback okay. I think we work so hard with our teams to create a great culture where we can give each other feedback, but it often stops there. And then it's like we go to pull managers or leaders in and share that feedback with them, and that process can be a little more foreign the higher up that food chain you go. So figure out how to create a culture of feedback where all levels of the organization can be part of reviewing feedback. Incorporate this into planning cycles. So if once a month you do a session where you're looking at roadmaps or you're looking at OKRs, fold in time to look at retro data and get more eyes on what's happening at the team level. And then take action on this, right? Like I said, I think one of the biggest kiss of death of a retro is not doing anything with the information. So getting more attention on it, being able to elevate retro themes and patterns up the organization requires that you are also going to do something with that data. So close that feedback loop. Take that opportunity to say, here's what we heard from the teams. here's what we're going to do with it as an organization. Here's how we're going to measure it, and here's how you'll know that we're listening, basically.
Hi, sorry, it's Shelly. I just have a question.
Hi, Shelly.
Yeah. What's an OKR?
Oh, OKRs are a term called objective and key result. So sometimes organizations use these to create alignment towards basically the business outcomes that they're driving to. So at the top level, the organization would have organization level objectives, and then key results are like the small measures that they're taking to ensure that they're delivering on that objective. And those can trickle all the way down to individual OKRs that kind of ladder up to that corporate strategy or corporate objective. So what I see sometimes is like when an organization, maybe they have 3 or 4 corporate OKRs where it's something around like new customer acquisition or retention. They can create themes for retro feedback that maybe ladder up to some of those corporate goals, so you can see how all of this is impacting what you're delivering.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. We've got time here for more questions, so I'll show you this. This is a screenshot from ScatterSpoke. I'm actually going to drop a link here in the chat so that you guys can all participate in a retrospective and give some feedback. So this whole concept that we're talking through here is actually something we built into this tool. And if you look here on the left-hand side at this nested tree view, all of the teams that are part of a program or part of a portfolio have the ability to select cards from their retros and promote them up to the next level so that they can be part of a retrospective. So they kind of accumulate here in the parking lot. And then when you go to have a program level retro or portfolio level retro, you've already collected feedback from all of the teams, and it's all anonymous from which team it comes from. So let's circle back to this, right? Do you know how many teams may be struggling with the same exact problem as your team? And think about how much data you're all probably sitting on inside of your organization about common problems and the impact those problems are having in a quantitative way, where if you connect all of that together, you can make a compelling case to fix them together. That's everything I have for the group. My email address is here. Same with Twitter handle. If you prefer to reach out over Twitter, I'm happy to share the slides. I'm going to exit out of this so I can maybe see anybody left with video, and we'll open it up for Q&A.
Great. Yeah, I think we have a few questions coming in the chat window. I'm more than happy to maybe read it one at a time for you. I think maybe we can start from the last one. I think someone was wanted to understand what is that software. I think the one you just shared with the on the screen.
Yeah, that's ScatterSpoke. So that is the tool that we built for retrospectives. So it allows you to run fully anonymous scaled retrospectives where you can promote the information from the teams up to the program portfolio or organization levels. I actually just dropped a link in the chat to do a retro on this talk. So you guys can add your feedback to the columns there. It says, what did you like? What did it lack? What did you learn? And what do you long for next? Or what do you want to do with what you learned tonight? So you can play around a little bit with the tool in that link as well.
Great. I hope it answers Abur. I apologize if I did not pronounce your name right. I think that is what he was. Okay, so there is a follow-up. Maybe I can, if I may, I can start from the top. I think so the first came from Arishad Hussain. If Arishad is on the call, feel free to unmute yourself. I can read the question for you. So there are two parts to his question. The first part is, when dealing with multiple distributed teams, and in brackets he writes ART. What is the best way to perform retro ceremony?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I can speak to this particularly from the lens of being a founder of a retrospective tool. There are a lot of retrospective tools out there right now. And, you know, I think even if your organization isn't willing to invest in a retrospective tool, Google Docs is a great place to gather feedback anonymously from the teams, where people can compile their thoughts and you can kind of roll those up over time. I think the most important piece there is making sure that you've got all of that data piling up somewhere, right? And even if you're, you know, as a Scrum Master, if you're moving individual retro cards into a spreadsheet so you can attach themes and sort them and kind of see by date what's happening, that's a great place to start and start to mine that data. So that you can do something with it and see if, you know, are there patterns, are there themes, are we seeing the same thing over and over? But, you know, I think back to how many retros I've run in my career, especially in person, where I've gone and, you know, at the end, taken all the sticky notes off the whiteboard and thrown them in the recycling bin. It's kind of crazy to think about how much information you're losing there about how that organization is working. So I think, you know, there's lots of options, there's lots of different tools available, but I think you can even start pretty cheaply with Google Docs.
If I may, the second part to his question, or maybe it is a different question. What data has been most valuable to collect in retrospective in your experience that actually adds value for your team and organization?
That's a great one. I typically collect three what I would consider flow metrics. So how much work in progress did we have? What was our cycle time and what was our throughput? And I review those on a regular basis. I also like to gather more for myself than for the team, but if you've done a timeline retrospective, I think looking at key events for each retro can be nice. So even being able to say, like, here's the performance kind of data that we're looking at in terms of those flow metrics and how we're delivering value, but what events took place? So did we lose a developer this week? Did somebody get COVID and was out for a month? Was it Thanksgiving? So really trying to connect the dots between the data, that quantitative feedback, and then how are people feeling? Are they burned out? Are they overloaded? Was it an easy sprint? Did it feel like everything was really smooth? And when you think about all of that, tying that back to events is something that I think is kind of an important piece of data. So whether you're just collecting timestamps, like date stamps on each of the pieces of feedback, or if you want to gather some more specific events, I think that can be a useful tool in evaluating the information that you've collected.
Sorry, I muted myself. The question has started flooding for some reason, but I have a few that been posted throughout the presentation. So I'll probably would like to take those first, and if there is time left, we can get to the rest. So there was another one from Dana, if I pronounce her name right. I am working with a non-profit, and I am trying to persuade our president to run a retrospective for our organization projects. I'm afraid it may be too scary. So I'm not sure, is it a statement or a question? Okay, let's go to the next one. Sorry.
It was a little bit of it was actually a bit of a question because we're a nonprofit, so it's a little unusual to be using Agile in there, but because we're so small, we're trying to run it efficiently and do small increments of projects. But introducing something like a retrospective to a group of people who this is something they've never really heard of is very scary, because there's the fear that nobody wants to be wrong, or they don't want to get hurt because something, didn't work out the way that it was supposed to. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you introduce something like this to a non-development company, if that's the right way to put it?
Yeah, definitely. There is something called the Prime Directive that I think is a great place to start for people who this isn't, a common pattern for them. And the Prime Directive says, regardless of what we're going to uncover here today, we're going to go in assuming that everybody did their best. and went in with the best intentions of getting this work through. And I usually try to set the stage maybe with even a few more ground rules, like we won't use no finger pointing, no direct, like I'm going to call Dana out and say, I got blocked because you didn't have your work done, right? Like, let's think about how we're framing this in a way to help focus on how we can improve instead of calling each other out. So I think just setting some like working rules for a session where it's a new group and this isn't a common practice for them can be really helpful. But then I think, making it so that you're gathering that feedback anonymously can be really helpful. And then I also like, with any tool that I'm using, I like to gather as much feedback as I can ahead of time. So that gives you a chance as a facilitator to really read through the feedback and think about how you want to focus the conversations, and maybe you're looking at like those themes and patterns before you ever get in the room. My experience has been, I think one of the biggest downsides to how we run retrospectives on a regular basis is that we put everybody in a room or on Zoom and we say, you have 15 minutes to tell me what you think about what we did for the last 2 weeks, go. And you're sitting there going, I don't know. I feel like when we did sprint planning, I didn't feel well, or I was tired, or my kid was screaming at me. And so you're having a hard time. And what ends up coming to light are the things that maybe happened yesterday, or the things that were the most recent, but not some of the good stuff that happened 2 weeks ago because you don't remember. So I think one of the best things you can do in this case is set something up and give people an opportunity to be really thoughtful in their feedback and add it offline anonymously early, so you have a chance to review it and think about how you want to facilitate that conversation.
Thank you. That was actually very helpful.
Cool. Good.
Great. Let me take the next one. Tausif Sayed. How to make team talk specifically when working with senior and experienced software team? And they think retrospective is a waste of time to have a meeting and implementing action items. Retro with mature teams, I think there is a question mark there. How to connect and motivate? I don't know
I
if
think there's another question over here too I saw that came in about how to make them, like, how do you keep them from becoming mundane? It was a little easier, I think, before COVID to be like, let's go outside, let's go get a beer, let's go, let's try to do something fun. I try to really make sure that I'm being thoughtful about the way I'm doing retros based on how I know the team has been for the last 2 weeks. So like in ScatterSpoke, you can do an entire retro with Giphies. I've done that before where I said, we're not going to talk. You can't use any words. You can only answer these questions with Giphy links. And then we'll go through and talk about them. I try to always kick off with some kind of question, like, if this last sprint was a car, what kind of car would it be and why, just to get everybody talking and laughing, especially if it's going to be a harder conversation. But I think the key there when things become mundane and they seem like you're doing the same thing over time is to maybe dig into what's coming out of those retros. So I think if the team feels like they're having the same conversation and nothing's changing, they start to check out and nobody really wants to participate anymore. I think when teams feel like they're being heard, and as a coach or a scrum master, you're doing something with that feedback, you're taking it and raising up the volume or making sure that leadership knows that there's an issue with something, they're going to be a lot more candid and a lot more engaged in that conversation because they know that it will change things.
Great. I think, sorry. I think someone is trying to speak. Is it
That's me, sorry.
Parag?
Yes. Yeah. Can I ask my question if you don't mind?
You want to jump the queue? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I never typed my question. So, and
Okay.
I'm hoping that my question is going to answer a lot of questions in the queue as well. Colleen, I'm trying to learn how to set the context for a retro. So one of the common questions that I see in the thread there is about making people talk, or how do you ensure that it's not getting mundane, because there's a set frequency that we do retrospective at, and my focus is to ensure we are adding value in the end, and it's not a check in the box activity. So essentially what I've learned is setting the context for the retrospective plays a major role in terms of where the retrospective goes. So I try different things like,
Absolutely.
having a theme-based retro, or what kind of decision or outcome do we want from a retro, those kind of things. But even I run out of ideas a lot of times. So I'm trying to learn how to set the context or set the pace of a retro every time and keep the enthusiasm going, and how to keep people still engaged even after the 5th retro.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's funny. I think everyone's got a slightly different answer on this, right? And I've heard a lot of people talk about games and change the format, come up with games, come up with different questions. But I think that it's to me, it's really about getting like better quality feedback to have that good conversation. And that's where, I think the importance of gathering feedback over the course of the sprint. I've worked with teams where Kanban, like a Kanban team, had a giant sticky note next to their stand-up location, so that as things were coming up at stand-up, we could make notes of all of the things to make sure we retroed about. I think like one of the indications that maybe you're missing some meaty feedback to review is like when your retro is all about snacks. That's what I always see, is like the team will be like, we need better coffee. And I'm like, is that really impacting our ability to deliver? Maybe it is. But I think, a part of it, I think, is about how we're collecting the feedback and how do we make sure that we're getting meaningful feedback that we can do something with. And that's where kind of the same advice I was giving Dana, like, I really try to make space to get feedback over the course of the retro. I take notes throughout the sprint of things I'm hearing, or if I hear somebody say like, we're blocked by this thing, I try to make sure that I'll put that card into a retro so that we can talk about it. But I think, to me, it's less about making sure that everybody speaks up. It's more about the quality of of the information that we're gathering, and that we're having like a conversation about the problems and the things that happened over the course of that 2-week period.
That's great, but can you touch more on how to start off the meeting and set the context more?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I like the prime directive, like we talked about, for assuming everybody, did the best work that they could, and basically assuming positive intent. I usually set the context with that quantitative review. So I'll kick things off at the beginning of every retro by saying, let's take a look at the work we got done. So it looks like we completed 7 stories and 6 production defects over the last 2 weeks. Of those 7 stories, 3 of them were carryover from the last sprint. It looks like and kind of getting into like, what did we do? What did we deliver as a team? What happened? Key events, like I mentioned, like maybe we lost 3 days because it was a holiday week or something like that. And then I try to connect that data that we look at to big picture. So we delivered 7 stories, 6 production bugs. It looks like 3 of these stories were carryover. Maybe those stories roll up to 2 epics. This epic's 30% complete. This epic's 90% complete. Here's where we were at the last retro. So a lot of times when we were in person, I would do this on a big sticky note. So I could just bring the whole sticky note in, and you could kind of see the running data from retro to retro. And I like that because I think it sets some context too for gathering good feedback, right? So if we anchor ourselves in what did we do, then we start the conversation about that work rather than just trying to come up with something to put on a sticky note.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. I think someone has just maybe I think if I may pronounce his name right, Temi Tope, I think has suggested to rotate the facilitation also, or the facilitator. So that was one of the suggestion. Maybe we can get one more or 2 more. Let's see how can we deal this one. So there is one from Carla. How are next steps and action items that come out of the retrospectives prioritized? Assuming that it should not be impediments to the team during a sprint, should the Scrum Master try to take as many action items as possible to remove the burden of the team?
Oh, I love that. That's a great question. So I think I usually have the team vote on the action items and try to prioritize 1 or 2. And I would like caution not to bring in more than 1 or 2 improvements. It's 2 weeks, right? Like it's a very short period of time. And I try to get them to think about the action items that we're going to prioritize as an experiment. So I'll give you an example. I said, I mentioned at the beginning, I coach a lot of Kanban teams. One of the conversations that's always on the table is WIP limits or work in progress limits. So if a team were to tell me, we're going to review our data, we're going to do our retro and talk about our pace and our workload, and the team's going to say, I think our WIP limits are too low, and I would like to be able to have more work in progress, we should raise them. So my question to that team would be, what do we want to raise them to? And then in 2 weeks, what do we expect to see? Like, should our cycle time go down by a day? Should it go down by 5 days? Should our throughput increase by 1 story, by 5 stories? Let's try to rate this as almost like a 7th grade science experiment. If we make this change, what do we think will happen? And how can we check back in 2 weeks and see if it's working? I tend to give the teams a lot of autonomy, and I like the teams to really own those actions, because I think, all of Agile can feel a little bit like something that's being done to the team. Like they're being told to do Scrum, they're being told to do Kanban, they're being told to sit in a retrospective. So this is a chance for them to really take ownership of the process by making these small tweaks and small improvements. And so I like to try to make sure that this is something for the team to focus on. In the case where an improvement may be very specific to something in the process, or something that maybe we're saying we want to make sure that code reviews aren't blocking up work moving to QA. So we want to prioritize how long a ticket sits in a code review column. For something like that, I would ask one of the developers on the team or somebody on the team to help hold each other accountable. So maybe I would say, Nawaz, will you be the person that's going to call us out if something gets stuck in code review for more than a day? So I try to get the team really engaged in holding each other accountable to whatever they prioritize as being the highest action items to put into place.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. You said it all. I think there are. I see. I unfortunately we ran out of time today. There is someone who's interested to understand the coaching program you have, and I believe Colleen's contact detail is there on the deck, as well as I think in the meetup invite also. So you should be able to contact her maybe on LinkedIn or through maybe I don't know if there is any other details shared on the deck, but yeah, I think she should be reachable through those medium. And I think there are a couple of questions on throughput and interrupt buffer. So you know what, the next meetup we are going to meet on the 31st of March. We have the topic for the next month is agile matrix, and this is again going beyond agile matrix. So we are going to touch upon the interrupt buffers and throughputs and all of that. So maybe if you guys want to come back next month, we would be able to get all these questions. And with that, I would really like to thank Colleen for making time for this great presentation. And I think I'm looking at the feedback. It's nothing short of awesome. Like, it's amazing feedback coming through. So thanks, Colleen.
Nawaz, sorry, I'm interrupting. I think you will have to take a photo of this session. This is grand. This is epic. You have to take a photo. Maybe you ask participants to use video, and we have a memorable photo before you go.
Oh, great. I love that.
Yeah, if people are more than there you go.
Everybody can turn your video on.
Yeah.
Can we just tile it in here?
Yeah, I think you would start seeing the video. There you go.
Hi, Colleen. Hi, Nawaz.
Hi there.
Hi, Colleen. Hi, Nawaz. Nice session.
Thanks, everyone. I think you can have a large gallery preview, maybe something like that.
Hello, this is Shri.
Good session.
Hey, Shri. Hi, Byron. Great to meet everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us
Thank
tonight.
you.
Good session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I've taken a image of.
And Nawaz, I don't see a place here to put in, to attach the file here. I think I can do it to the meetup though, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think I've taken a screen grab as well. So yeah, you should be able to maybe, or maybe send me the image. I should be able to. get it. Let me drop the here. I think I got an image of the. Oh, yeah.
Thank you,
There you go.
Nawaz. Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah, definitely. I'll email you this PDF and then I'll try to post it in Meetup. If not, I'll email it to you so you can distribute it for anybody that needs it.
Thanks, Colleen.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. It was great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Have a
care.
good evening.
Bye.